recording and then I'll start talking. Good morning. I'd like to welcome all of you to the ballot briefing on statewide ballot measures as well as county ballot measures given by the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles County. This is an event which the county has been sponsoring for longer than I've been involved in voter service, and that was starting in the middle of the 80s. So this is a long serving tradition to share expertise with all the leagues in Los Angeles County. My name is Margot Rieg. I'm co-president of the LA County League of Women Voters, which is an interleague organization. At this point, we have 10 member leagues. I've also been a voter service chair for most of my career in league and have conducted these pro and con presentations for a number of years. We're very happy to welcome our league speakers who have joined us from many counties in Southern and Central California to this, which is the first ballot briefing we've ever held on Zoom. We hope that you'll find our training useful as you go out to educate voters on the many issues presented to us this fall. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope that we will be able to do this kind of broader communication and sharing in the future. I think I've reminded some of you already, but most of you are seasoned Zoom participants. I would remind you that you need to please remain muted. We will do our comments and questions through the chat. And I'd like to see as many of you as possible rename yourself by clicking on the 3-dot icon that's in the upper right corner of your screen. There you can find a rename indication to click on, and you can add the name of your league in addition to your name so that we know where you're from. I'd appreciate that. Thank you. We will be posting links to materials prepared by League of Women Voters California in the chat, and we encourage you to use the pros and cons, the in-depths, to improve your knowledge of the details about each ballot measure. And in addition, the legislative analysts evaluations that are available at lao.ca.gov and the details in the California Voter Information Guide, which are on the Secretary of State's website, sos.ca.gov, as well as to inform your presentations. Many league presenters actually read the text of the actual bill in that California Voter Information Guide and highlight it to become much better informed about the actual details in every ballot measure. Then when you're asked some of those tricky questions from the audience, you may be able to answer them. Most of the resources are posted on votersedge.org under the tab Measures. Now I'd like to introduce my co-president and former League of Women Voters California State Voter Service Director, Nancy Marr, who will conduct the ballot briefing. Nancy, welcome.
Thank you, Margot. And just so you'll know, we are planning to post the scripts that our speakers are using today on the League of Women Voters Greater Los Angeles area website. They will be posted sometime next week, and you'll be able to go to that website and see the scripts. We didn't have the ability to get them posted by today, but we will start on Monday with that posting. Okay, we're going to go through the propositions in order, and if we have a certain amount of time for each proposition, we'll take questions or comments at the end of that. If there are some that we didn't have time to cover, we can take them at the finished. And also, if we have to adjust the schedule, our first speaker is on Proposition 1, and it is Fatima Malik, who is with the Beach Cities League and County League. So Fatima, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm actually, if you could give me permission to
I-
share my screen,
I
please.
gave multiple,
Okay,
I
let
think
me
I
give it a
did.
go.
Did you try it and fail?
Yes, I'm able to. Thank you. Okay, great. I'm going to put some links in the chat before I start because I have the luxury of talking about Proposition 1. And so I'm here to brief you on Proposition 1, the right to reproductive freedom, and explain the past 53 years in 7 minutes. So give me just 1 second while I start this. Oops, hold on. May have to redo this. There we go. One second. I'm having some issues here. You would think I'd be an expert at this point. Give me just a second. Okay. And here we are.
Wasting everybody's time.
Okay. Sorry, I don't mean to be wasting everyone's time. I will certainly move as quickly as possible.
You are wasting everybody's time.
Okay, great. Can everyone see my screen on Proposition 1?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm here to brief you on California Proposition 1. It is a legislative constitutional amendment, which means that 2/3 of the membership of each chamber of the California State Legislature must propose an amendment, which then goes on a statewide ballot to be ratified or rejected by the state's voters with a majority vote. Ratified amendments take effect the day after the election. The question is, should the California Constitution expressly provide that the state of California shall not deny or interfere with an individual's reproductive freedom and their most intimate decisions, including the right to choose to have an abortion and their right to choose or refuse contraception? I'm going to briefly cover the federal and state backgrounds as it pertains to the proposition. If you are not familiar with the cases and legislations, I'm going to put the links in the chat right now. I am just not having the best luck with technical. Here we go. Got it. Okay, there we are. Okay, great. So first we're going to start with Roe v. Wade. If you're not familiar with it, it recognized a protected right to choose an abortion in the US Constitution in 1973. Ever since then, the states and Congress.
Fatima, you're
Yes.
not showing slideshow. You're not in slideshow mode. We're not seeing anything other than your first slide.
Here you go.
Okay, that'll work.
Okay, great. Everybody see it?
Yeah, just.
Okay. All right. The Mississippi law authorizes that the state's attorney general, as well as the Mississippi State Department of Health or the Mississippi State Board of Medical Licensure, to impose professional sanctions, including fines and loss of licensure on any physician who performed an abortion after 15 weeks. The constitutionality of that statute was challenged in the courts in the case of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. In June 2022, the Supreme Court announced its opinion in the Dobbs case, upholding the Mississippi law and overturning the Roe decision, therefore eliminating any federal protection for the right to choose an abortion. In a concurring opinion, Justice Thomas stated that federal protection or other personal rights like contraception should also be overturned. A primary holding is a statement of law that the court's answer to the issue. In this case, the primary holding was the following. Abortion presents a profound moral question, and the Constitution does not prohibit the citizens of each state from regulating or prohibiting abortion. This decision overrules Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania versus Casey. The state law provides the right for reproductive privacy. The California Constitution guarantees everyone the right to privacy, but does not define what this right includes. However, the California Supreme Court has found that this right to privacy includes the right to make reproductive choices, such as whether or not to have an abortion or use contraceptives. In addition, state law was later passed to expressly protect these rights. State law has some restrictions on abortions because of the way California courts have interpreted the right to privacy. The state can only restrict abortions when needed to meet certain state interests such as public health and safety. For example, California law requires abortion providers to be licensed. In addition, abortions can only be performed on a viable fetus if the pregnancy puts the health or life of the person who is pregnant at risk. The state also helps to pay for health care in many Californians. However, the state pays the full cost of abortions provided through Medi-Cal. And the state alone pays for the cost of the plans to cover abortions for these people. So Proposition 1 changes the California Constitution to say that the state cannot deny or interfere with a person's reproductive freedom, and that people have the fundamental right to choose whether or not to have an abortion, whether or not to use contraceptives. It prohibits the state from denying or interfering with the individual's reproductive freedom in their most intimate decisions, which includes their fundamental right to choose to have an abortion, their fundamental right to choose or refuse contraceptives. It specifies that this constitutional amendment is intended to further the constitutional right of privacy and the constitutional right to not be denied equal protection. It also specifies that nothing contained in the measure narrows or limits the right to privacy or equal protection. A yes vote supports the amending state constitution to prohibit the state from interfering with or denying an individual's reproductive freedom, which is defined to include a right to an abortion and a right to contraceptives. So therefore, a yes vote means the California Constitution would be changed to expressly include existing rights to reproductive freedom, such as the right to choose whether or not to have an abortion and use contraceptives. A no vote opposes this amendment, providing a right to reproductive freedom in the state constitution. No vote means the California Constitution would not be changed to expressly include existing rights to reproductive freedom. However, the rights would continue to exist under the other state law. For the fiscal effect, there's no direct fiscal effect because reproductive rights are already protected by the state law. Proposition 1 would change the California Constitution to expressly include existing rights to reproductive freedom. Because these rights already exist in California, the proposition would have no direct fiscal effect. However, whether a court might interpret the proposition to expand reproductive rights beyond existing law is unclear. If the court finds the proposition expands these rights, there could be a fiscal effect to the state. However, I did not find what that possibly could be. Here are some of the supporters and opposition on the proposition. Take a look at that. I won't read through them. And that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't see any questions in the chat at this time.
Okay, great. Well, then I did my job.
Okay, then if a question comes up later, we will take it at the end of the session.
Very good.
Our next speaker is Tom Carson, who is going to speak on both 26 and 27 as they have a linkage. And Tom is a member of the Greater Los Angeles League. He's a past state treasurer and a past state board treasurer. Excuse me, he's a past LA County treasurer and a past state board treasurer. So Tom, and is currently still, I believe, our budget chair. We ask him every year for LA County to deal with our budget. And our investment chair. So he's a busy guy. Okay, Tom, please go ahead. You're muted, Tom.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
Good morning to everybody. Glad to be here. Both Prop 26 and 27 are initiative, constitutional, and statutory amendments. The underlying question for both is, should California allow sports betting for people 21 years or older? Now, the two propositions would answer that question yes, but would do it in different ways. So we'll go through that. As background, the California Constitution generally prohibits gambling. However, over the years, it has been amended a number of times to allow certain forms of gambling in certain locations. Currently, we have the California Lottery, card rooms in which card games like a form of poker are allowed, betting on horse racing at 4 major racetracks, and some form of gambling in American Indian-owned casinos. Sports betting is not currently legal. All forms of gambling are regulated under federal, state, and/or local law. Now, card rooms are more common in urban areas and have been in existence longer than tribal casinos, but they both offer card games. The card rooms offer card games like poker, but a specific type of poker that is different than what's played in Nevada casinos. American Indian tribes have a specific status under federal law as sovereign nations, and their commerce is subject to federal jurisdiction. So any state regulation of tribal activity is limited to what is allowed by federal law and negotiated agreements known as compacts between the state and each tribe, each of which must also be approved by the federal government. California has compacts currently with 79 tribes, which operate a total of 66 casinos spread among 28 counties. The compacts with the tribal casinos determine such things as what payments are to be made by the casinos to state and relevant local governments. Last year, tribes paid about $65 million to support state regulatory and gambling addiction program costs, and tens of millions of dollars to local governments where they're located. Additionally, tribes operating larger casinos annually pay about $150 million to other tribes that either don't operate any casinos or have casinos with less than 350 slot machines. The California Gambling Control Commission is the overall state regulatory body responsible for setting policy, establishing regulations, making determinations of suitability for gaming employees and other individuals and entities, issuing licenses, acting as administrator of different funds set up for the use of these monies, and the trustee over revenues deposited in the Revenue Sharing Trust Fund. In addition, the California Department of Justice, district attorneys, and city's attorneys may enforce criminal laws relating to gambling activities. Revenue from tribal casinos goes to the general fund, as well as the separate funds described above. A 2018 U.S. Supreme Court decision struck down the federal law that bans sports betting in all states but Nevada. Since then, about 35 states have legalized such betting in one form or another. Oregon has had on-site and online sports betting since 2019, with one company running the whole operation. Arizona started in 2021 with 3 vendors. Now, the lack of legal sports betting doesn't mean that Californians have not been engaging in it. An unpublished study from 2019 cited estimates that Californians were making billions of dollars in sports bet either through bookies or through offshore companies. So now, what are the propositions proposed? First, Proposition 26 would expand the kind of operations that tribal casinos can run, such as roulette and dice games like craps. More importantly, Proposition would allow tribal casinos and the 4 horse racetracks to offer on-site betting on sports events such as football games. No betting would be allowed on any games which involve California colleges or universities. The proposition would impose a 10% tax on net sports betting at racetracks. That's net of what they have to pay out as prizes. Any tax on sports betting at casinos would be determined by renegotiation of the existing compacts that the state has with each tribe running a casino. The tax revenue left after deducting the cost of the sports betting would be divided 70% to the state general fund, 15% for programs dealing with gaming and mental health research, and 15% to the Department of Justice for enforcing the regulation of gaming laws. Further, the proposition would allow a person or entity, any kind of person or entity who is aware of a violation of the gaming law, to file a civil action if our California Attorney General declines to act. But any penalty assessed in that civil action would go to this new fund. Now, by contrast, Prop 27 would not adjust any of the games currently, or the games to be allowed to the casinos other than sports betting. But they will allow tribal casinos to offer sports betting, but they would have to pay an initial $10 million to be licensed. And after each 5 years, they have to pay an additional $1 million renewal fee. Secondly, they would allow gaming companies, not beyond tribal casinos, to offer online sports betting if they strike a deal with the tribe to operate in California. They pay an initial licensing fee of $100 million, plus their 5-year renewal fee would be $10 million rather than $1 million. In order to qualify, these organizations have to have existing online sports betting licenses in at least 10 other US states, so they get experienced organizations. Again, this would impose a 10% tax on net sports betting for all the companies or tribes offering it. However, this could be applied, could be recouped by the initial licensing or renewal licensing fees that they each paid at the beginning and every 5 years. After paying the state regulatory cost, the revenue from the tax and the licensing fee would go into a new fund. Out of that fund, 85% would be used for homelessness and related mental health programs. The remaining 15% would go to American Indian tribes that are not involved in sports betting. And none of the revenue from all of these taxes or licensing fees would ever be included in the state's general fund for purposes of allocating money to programs such as public education. There are some similarities between the two propositions in that both limit such sports betting to those who are 21 years old or older. Both of them provide significant new rules for the regulation of sports betting. No betting could occur on events such as high school sports or elections. Proposition 26 has a provision that says that if both Proposition 26 and Prop 27 passed, the one with the most yes votes would prevail. On the other hand, Prop 27 stated that it and 26 do not conflict, so that if both got a overall approval, they would both go into effect at the same time. But if a court found that parts were in conflict, the provisions of the one that received the most yes votes would prevail. Now, as to fiscal effects, predictions of the impact of this law are difficult to determine according to the LAO, because much depends both on the terms of the agreements with the casinos and on whether people's time on sports betting will be in addition to or in lieu of their current time spent on gambling. Proposition 26 should increase state revenues from tax payments made on sports betting, potentially reaching the tens of millions of dollars a year. There would also be increased costs to enforce and regulate the new betting, potentially reaching the low tens of millions of dollars. There would definitely be increased state enforcement costs, not to exceed several $1 million a year. The size of Prop 27's impact depend on variables such as the a number of entities, both tribal casinos and gaming companies that offer the online betting, how the tribal casino compacts are renegotiated to cover this subject. Under these circumstances, there's a potential for increase in state revenue reaching from hundreds of millions of dollars up to $500 million a year. But there would definitely be increased regulatory costs, which could end up being in the mid-tens of millions of dollars a year. So supporters say that this Proposition 26 would continue the 20-year legacy of allowing closely regulated gaming to support American Indian economies. And Prop 26 is the most responsible approach to authorizing sports betting and would promote Indian self-reliance. The major supporters of this proposition are Indian tribal casinos, or I should say the Indian tribes who have casinos. And it's also supported by the NAACP, some unions, our state lieutenant governor, and our state treasurer. The opponents say that Prop 26 would massively expand gambling in California for the benefit of large casinos and would leave casino workers unprotected from worker safety, wage and hour harassment, and anti-discrimination laws. There's a sort of a broad range of organizations and individuals who have opposed this. Society of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and while there's American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees local chapter. Anyway, so far the major contributors towards being in favor of 26, although it's largely also a combined yes on 26, no on 27 campaign, has totaled 118, this is as of yesterday, $118 million, all from major American Indian tribes. The no on 26 has a total contributions of $45 million, largely from card clubs. The supporters of Prop 27 say it requires state-of-the-art technology to ensure that minors do not place bets, and it requires strict auditing of the use of the money in the trust fund to make sure the money is appropriately used for people who are homeless and tribes that are to receive funds. This is supported by a few tribes, but also others like Major League Baseball. I'm sorry, sporting, yes. Major League Baseball, and some local mayors, Darrell Steinberg, mayor of Sacramento, Libby Schaaf, Oakland mayor, and Jerry Dyer, Fresno mayor. The opponents say that online sports betting will not generate jobs or create investment in the state because the sports betting operator will return most of the profits out of state. They say that allowing promotion offers to be deducted from the gross betting revenue will reduce the revenue available to the state. The opponents to this are largely Indian tribes, but also including the California Democratic Party, the League of California Cities, our Assembly Speaker, Anthony Rendon, and Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins, California Teachers Association, Community Workers of America. The supporters of Prop 27 have raised so far $157 million, largely from gaming companies, the non-tribal gaming companies. The no on 27 have raised a total of $184 million, but that is somewhat distorted. That includes the total of the $118 million raised by the combined yes on 26, no on 27 column. But clearly the total raise so far is well in excess of, I think, any prior propositions in the state of California, even surpassing the ones 2 years ago on the Uber and Lyft and DoorDash propositions. So that's my report, and I'm ready for any questions.
We have two questions. One is relating to where the money will go from either of the propositions. Does it go to the state general fund, or does it go directly into funding for homeless and mental health and to the Indian tribes?
Well, it differs by proposition. In Proposition 26, 70% goes to the general fund, 15% goes to mental health, gambling, addiction research, and 15% to the Department of Justice, whereas in Prop 27, none of it goes to the general fund. It's 85% for homelessness and related mental health programs, and 15% to other Indian tribes who are not involved in sports betting.
Okay. And also another question, has there been any discussion about potential impacts on the NBA present? I thought the NBA did not go to Nevada because they allow sports betting.
I have not heard anything about NBA, no. I didn't see any reference to that at all.
Okay. And finally, can you clarify about the impact if both pass?
Well, within our Constitution, there's a rule that if two propositions are dealing with essentially the same issue, that the one that achieves the most yes votes is the one that prevails. But that assumes that there's a conflict between the two propositions. And so Proposition 26 supporters and initiators believe that there is a conflict, that for example, whether it's on site in the casinos or online is a conflict. Now, the people supporting Prop 27 say, no, that's not true. You can do both at once. There's no issue of conflict here. So, the only way to resolve that issue will ultimately, first, if both pass, and then secondly, it's probably going to go to the courts to determine how you define what a conflict is. Clearly, the Prop 26 people are pretty strong because they put up a lot of money to oppose 27, whereas the Prop 27 proponents have not put up money to defeat 26. Directly.
Thank you very much, Tom. And we're going to move on to our next speaker, who will speak on Prop 28, Terry Neustadter, who is the member of the Beach Cities League. So Terry.
Good morning. Yes, this is Proposition 28. It's an initiative statute, and it talks about providing additional funding for arts and music education in public schools. So what's the question? Should the state provide specific funding for arts and music education in public schools in an amount higher than the existing constitutional minimum amount required for public education? The current situation is that former LAUSD Superintendent Austin Buettner has spearheaded this push to boost the amount of spending on art and music programs in California's PK through 12 schools. Arts funding has declined in many school districts as a result of budget cuts since the Great Recession, and they have also shifted to support a renewed emphasis on reading and math. There is currently no source of annual funding in public schools K through 12 for arts and music education. The California Constitutional Amendment Prop 98, which was passed in 1988, requires a minimum amount to be spent on K through 14, which is kindergarten through community college, of around 40% of the general budget. This minimum amount, it's calculated annually. But currently, if you look at what's going on in our public schools, there's only 1 in 5 of them has a full-time teacher for traditional arts programs, according to the initiative's backers. State law requires that grades 1 through 6 must supply arts and music education to all students. High school students must complete a year of one of 3 courses, one of which is arts and music education. However, local governing boards or school districts control the amount of other instruction and when it is offered. This uneven landscape of racial and economic disparity also exists, where schools in wealthier areas with bigger budgets and robust parent fundraising support extensive arts and music programs, while schools in lower income communities that are largely Black and Latino have far less access. So what exactly does this proposition do? The ballot measure would provide additional funding for arts and music education in all preschool and K through 12 public schools, which includes charter schools. The funding would come from the state's general fund and at least 1% of the funding received by schools the prior year under Prop 98. Schools serving more economically disadvantaged students would receive a greater proportion of this funding, and most of the funding would be used to hire art teachers and staff. The Legislative Analyst's Office estimates that if Proposition 28 is passed, state spending on education would increase by roughly $1 billion annually. School boards would be required to certify each year that the money was used to pay for arts programs and post that information online. Arts education is supported by an overwhelming majority of Americans. It's essential for building children's capacity for creativity and self-expression, critical thinking, empathy, and other skills that help them engage with school and civic society. It also supports good mental health, which is critical at this point in time. Studies have linked it to improved attendance, better scores on standardized tests, and higher college aspirations, according to the LA Times. Programs, painting, sculpture, and photography, but it also includes graphic design, computer coding. Also, according to the LA, funds using a formula that concentrates money in low-income schools that need it the most. It's crucial because Black, Latino, and low-income students are far less likely than their white and wealthier counterparts to be taught music or art, both in and out of school, and are most dependent on schools to provide this kind of instruction. So what would the fiscal impact be? Prop 28 would increase state expenditures between $800 million and $1 billion annually. This is above the existing required constitutional expenditures from Prop 98, which link the minimum guarantee at close to 40% of the state general fund. Prop 28 would also adjust the minimum guarantee by student attendance and changes in the cost of living. About $8 to $9 million has been spent to support this proposition. It is supported by the Californians for art and music education in public schools, former LAUSD Superintendent Austin Buettner, and former U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan. What's the opposition? Well, there's no organized opposition to this bill. But what would happen would be, there's no taxes involved. It just would probably take money away from other state programs, state-funded programs in years when the budget needs to be tightened at a state level. So a yes vote means 1% of the total state and local revenues from the general fund would be spent to support a new annual source of funding for K through 12 public schools for art and music education. This is in addition to what local education agencies receive under Proposition 98, and there would be no new taxes. Schools with 500 or more students are required to use 80% of this funding to employ teachers, leaving 20% for training and materials. A portion of additional funding will be based on a local agency's share of economically disadvantaged students. A no vote means there will be no new allocation of funds to support the arts and music and education. Questions?
Okay, the first question is, was there any information as to why charter schools were included?
No, I was surprised when I saw that, but because it's a public school, I think it's just part of that. Even when I read the description, through the actual prop, it didn't say.
Okay, and also, do we have any information of what is guaranteed by Prop 98? I assume that means the amount of money.
It's usually around 40% of the general fund budget. So it varies with California's budget itself. Right now, since we're flush, there's more money to go around. And I think the issue is more that when that's not the case. So it's 40% of the general fund budget.
Okay, those are the two. Oh, how is this being justified with teacher shortages and student enrollments way down?
it doesn't address that. It's really just addressing arts and music education. And I think when this was first formed and brought to people, a lot of that information, including the information on mental health, haven't been this is, I think, for student or for teachers. 80% of the money is going to go for teachers. So that's, I would think, a good news. It just may not be where we might think it needed to be devoted to.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And we're going to move on right now to Robbie Davis, who is our next speaker on Prop 29. Robbie is a member of the Pasadena Area League, a past national nominations chair. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Robbie.
Thank you. Okay, so Proposition 29 is an initiative statute, and the subject is the regulation of kidney dialysis clinics. It's deja vu all over again. So, because we've had this twice before, but the background on this proposition is that there are about 80,000 patients in California that receive dialysis services from about 650 chronic dialysis clinics in the state. And these clinics are licensed by the California Department of Public Health using federal standards. And they often operate 6 days a week for extended hours to help people who have job responsibilities to be able to get their dialysis services in the off hours. There are two for-profit companies, DaVita Incorporation, which is in Colorado, and Fresenius Medical Care, which is a German company. They operate about 3/4 of the dialysis clinics in California, and the remaining ones are operated by a variety of nonprofit and for-profit entities. Most patients on dialysis are covered by Medicare and or Medi-Cal, and those programs pay a fixed rate for the dialysis clinic services. About 10% of the patients are covered by some kind of group or individual health insurance plans, and those plans actually pay quite a bit more to the clinics because they negotiate their rates directly with each insurance company. So they get the clinics get a lot more money from the patients that are under health insurance plans rather than Medicare or Medi-Cal. So the proposal for Prop 29 is that a licensed physician, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant, in each case, that person has to have at least 6 months experience in kidney care, must be on site at all times when dialysis is being performed. And if there's a shortage and there is not enough of these people available to be on site, the measure says that the clinic may be allowed to use telehealth for up to 1 year while they go about the process of finding somebody to be on site. So another part of the measure would require that clinics report the name of any physician who has more than 5% interest in the clinic. They have to report that information to the patients. The clinics have to report information about dialysis-related infections among their patients, and that's already required by the federal government. Requires that they report if there's infections in the clinic. And also this measure says that clinics have to obtain permission from the state if they want to close or if they want to reduce their hours. So there have been two very similar previous initiatives, one in 2018 and the other in 2020. All of these have the same thing about reporting disease-related infections, about getting permission from the state to close. So those were all similarities. The difference is that Prop 29 has different reporting requirements, and that would be for reporting the physician's ownership interest in a clinic. and the requirement for on-site personnel. And both of those previous initiatives were backed by the Service Employees Union, United Healthcare Workers, and both of those initiatives lost by substantial margins. So the fiscal implications from the legislative analyst says that there are fiscal implications to both the clinics and governments. The clinics would have to probably pay hundreds of thousands of dollars more for staff salaries annually. And then the state and local governments might have to pay tens of millions of dollars more annually if clinics close because of financial reasons, and that the patients end up having to go to the emergency room or other more expensive facilities that would cost the state more. Or it's possible that the clinics would try to negotiate higher reimbursement rates to cover the additional salaries, and so those reimbursement rates would then cost Medicare and Medi-Cal more money. So those are the possible fiscal implications. So the supporters include a dialysis patient care technician, the president of the Baptist Ministries Conference of Los Angeles, and a dialysis patient. And the supporters say that requiring a physician or a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant to be present during a dangerous procedure like dialysis is just common sense, and it's a matter of patient safety. They say that dialysis clinics may use telehealth for up to a year if the required healthcare workers are not available. And they say that the big corporations that operate these clinics can easily make up the required staffing changes and still profit hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And as of June 30th, I haven't looked more recently, supporters have raised about $7 million, and almost all of that is from the Service Employees Union, United Healthcare Workers. The opponents include the executive director of the American Nurses Association of California. There's a dialysis patient who is in opposition, and the president of the California Medical Association is also opposed to this. And they say that dialysis is administered by specially trained technicians, and every dialysis patient is under the care of their own kidney doctor. So this administrative oversight, these extra people aren't necessary. They're saying that Prop 29 would worsen our healthcare worker shortage. It would take thousands of individuals away from hospitals where they're needed and put them into administrative jobs in these clinics. And they say that the unnecessary requirement for on-site administrators who don't even provide patient care would cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and that would force clinics to close or reduce their hours. And as of June 30th, about $36 million has been raised in opposition. And this money has come just from Fresenius and DaVita, the two companies that own all the clinics, or 75% of the clinics in California. So the question is, should dialysis clinics be required to have additional administrative staff on site at all times, and to be required to report clinic ownership information to the patient and to the state? So a yes vote means that you want these changes, and a no vote means that you do not.
Okay, thank you. We have one question. Is there a health reason to have the specified staff on site?
Well, it depends on if you ask for the supporters or the opponents. You know, the supporters would say yes, like their argument is that, you know, it's dangerous and there should be somebody there just in case of an emergency. The opponents say no, that the kidney doctors, patients are taken care of, and the actually federal law requires that every patient that's undergoing dialysis be visited by their own kidney doctor at least once a month. So those are the arguments. So I guess it depends on who you talk to, but anyway.
So and then there are two questions that are related. are there statistics on how many emergencies arise during dialysis? And also, are there statistics on problems with the current practice?
I haven't seen specific numbers, but the interesting thing was that there was a study recently about patient satisfaction, and California, there's only a few states that require specific people to be on-site staffing requirements. And so they did a national study to compare patient satisfaction between and also problems between the states that have staffing requirements and those that don't. And actually, California, who does not have staffing requirements, actually had much higher patient satisfaction ratings than the states that did have staffing requirements. So that's one thing. But like I said, I don't have specific information on numbers or percentages of actual emergencies or problems.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we're going to move on then to Proposition 30. And we have our next speaker, Natalia Zernitskaya from the Santa Monica League is here to speak on that. And go right ahead, Natalia.
Great, thank you. So, hi, Natalia Zernitskaya. As Nancy said, I'll be presenting on Prop 30. So Proposition 30, also known as income tax on millionaires for electric cars. So the question being asked of the voter is, should the tax rate on personal income above 2 million be increased by 1.75% and the revenue dedicated to zero emission vehicle subsidies, zero emission vehicle infrastructure such as electric vehicle charging stations, and wildfire suppression and prevention programs? So a little bit of the background here. In response to climate change, California has implemented a number of programs to promote zero emission vehicles. So that includes requiring ride sharing companies like Uber and Lyft to have 90% of their drivers using zero emissions vehicles by 2030. And in addition to the high cost of zero emissions vehicles, the state's electrical grid would require upgrades in order to handle, well, it does require upgrades in order to handle the increased capacity that additional zero emissions vehicles would require. Currently, the state has approximately $10 billion allocated over 5 years to increasing the number of zero emissions vehicles in the state. And in late August, this is a very new development, but provides some additional context. The California Air Resources Board approved a rule to phase out traditional gas-powered cars. And per CalMatters, automakers will, this is a quote, automakers will have to gradually electrify their fleet of new vehicles, beginning with about 35% of the 2026 models sold, increasing to 68% in 2030 and 100% for 2035 models. So it's a little bit of a complex new rule. I encourage y'all to look into it because there's more complexity and nuance than what I just said. And just for additional context, about 16% of new car sales in California this year are zero emissions, which is twice the share of those in 2020. State agencies are responsible for wildfire suppression and prevention on about a third of state land, and federal and local agencies are responsible for the rest. The state budget for wildfires this year is approximately $4 billion. And last year, California raised more than $130 billion, 16, not 60, sorry, 16% of sales. Oh yeah, I saw the question from Gloria in the chat. Last year, California raised more than $130 billion in revenue from personal income taxes. And currently California has a budget surplus of $97 billion. So what does Prop 30 say? So Prop 30, like I said, would increase the income tax rate for 1.75% for individual incomes above $2 million. And that's a marginal increase. So it's similar to most of the progressive income taxes that most of us are used to. And those funds, net of expenses, would be allocated to 45% of the funds would promote the purchase of zero emissions vehicles, including subsidies and rebates for passenger vehicles like cars, and medium and heavy duty vehicles like trucks and buses. 35% of the funds would increase the availability of zero emissions vehicles infrastructure like electric charging stations close to single and multifamily dwellings. So it's basically to help kind of build out the electric infrastructure that we need. Just for getting things like the areas to the things to plug things into, because cars, you got to plug them in to charge if they're electric. And 20% would help with would go to funding wildfire suppression and prevention. And Prop 30 does have a stipulation that at least half of the funds that are allocated for zero emissions vehicles and zero emissions vehicles charging must primarily benefit low income and disadvantaged communities. And it also requires that CAL FIRE makes hiring and training additional firefighters a top priority for its funds. The tax increase does have a sunset date of January 1st, 2043 or earlier if there are 3 consecutive calendar years in which statewide GHG emissions are 80% below 1990 levels. And I think I saw a question in the chat about the infrastructure improving the electrical grid. I did not see anything about that, and I didn't see anything in the language about battery disposal or offsetting of residual environmental impacts. The fiscal impact from this measure would be generating $3.5 to $5 billion annually in revenue in most years, increasing over time. So that would amount to between $2.8 billion to $4 billion annually in zero emissions vehicles funding, and between $700 million and $1 billion annually for wildfire response. And the measure could help decrease state and local costs for wildfire suppression and prevention, though the size of the fiscal effects is difficult to predict. So what do supporters say and what do opponents say, and who are they? Supporters say that existing programs are insufficient to address California's poor air quality, which is largely caused by automobile exhaust and wildfire smoke. Prop 30 would make electric vehicles more affordable and would create well-paying green jobs. Prop 30 would fund critically needed programs to prevent catastrophic wildfires and protect homes. And they also say strict accountability would ensure that these funds are spent as intended. There is some language in the measure about requirements for audits of the funds. So who supports it? The California State Firefighters, and they're also, so the following are signers of the ballot arguments and they support them. California State Firefighters, the American Lung Association, the Coalition for Clean Air, California Environmental Voters, the National Resources Defense Council, and the Union of Concerned Scientists. The supporters have, there has been, for the money part, because the money is always fun, who's funding this? The total from the top contributors was $16,643,707 as of, I want to say about yesterday morning. And the highest contributor is Lyft Inc., which had contributed $15,107,707. And the rest of them are $1,200,000, $50,000, etc. So what do opponents say? Opponents say that California is already spending more than $50 billion for a multi-year climate investment, including $10 billion for zero emissions vehicles. There is no guarantee that Prop 30 will make zero emissions vehicles affordable for most California families. Prop 30 locks money from income taxes, normally a major source of school funding, into special interests. Prop 30 is Lyft's attempt to get taxpayers to help foot the bill for the requirement to increase the number of zero emissions vehicles used. So who opposes it? And the following are the signers: Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, California Small Business Association, United Latinos Action, California Teachers Association, and Jack O'Connell, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, retired. There are also 2 other opponents who are not signers listed on here: Governor Gavin Newsom and the Republican Party of California. And the total from the top 10 contributors of the opposition of No on 30 is $2,433,210. I know that $10, very, very important. The highest contributor is an individual by the name of Mark Heising for $500,000, and the rest of them are under 500,000, about 100,000, between 100,000 and 500,000. So a yes vote means that taxpayers would pay an additional tax of 1.75% on personal income above $2 million annually. It also means that revenue collected from this additional tax would support zero emission vehicle programs and wildfire response and prevention activities. A no vote means no change would be made to taxes on personal incomes above $2 million annually. And I do have some other considerations noted here that may be interesting for y'all to know. Because I don't know, Nancy, do you want me to go to questions instead, and I can share the additional considerations later if they come up with questions?
If that would be okay with you, that would be
Yeah.
best so that we can get through the next three.
Yes, of course, please. Yeah.
But the questions, how is fire incidents impacted by this prop?
So 20% of the funds from this would go to fire prevention and fire suppression. So it would go to hiring more firefighters and doing more prevention activities. I did not see if it includes like retrofitting things to be more fire resilient.
And also, does this measure complement any of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provisions regarding electric vehicles?
I didn't see anything about that in here, but it might be because that was the timing was different. So I'm not aware of any.
Okay. Will you have time a little bit later? Do you have enough time to stay for a bit?
I'll stay on for a little bit. I've got another thing I have to be at 11:30
I know that.
today. Sorry, guys.
Well, let's go ahead and have Robbie present. Robbie Davis come back and present on Prop 30. Yes.
Okay. Prop 31 is a referendum, and a referendum is a little bit different. It's kind of, I think voters get a little bit confused because the people that put a referendum on the ballot, and they're paying all the money to put the referendum on the ballot, want you to vote no. And that's kind of counterintuitive. But basically, a referendum is asking you if you agree with a law that the legislature passed. And so I kind of like try to think about it as you're not voting on the referendum, you're voting on the law. So the subject of this referendum is the possible repeal of a law that prohibits the sale of certain flavored tobacco products. So the background is in 2020, the California legislature passed a bill, SB 793, that banned the sale of certain flavored tobacco products such as cigarettes, e-cigarettes, chewing tobacco, and snuff. And there are some exceptions. Premium handmade cigars they're not regulated. Loose leaf tobacco is not regulated. And tobacco that's used for hookahs, and that's this called shisha tobacco. So that's also not prohibited. Tobacco companies immediately after the legislature passed this, they began the process of collecting signatures on a referendum to prohibit SB 793 from taking effect. And the law is that, or the rule is that you have 90 days to collect enough signatures. And while the signatures are being collected, the law doesn't go into effect. And if enough signatures are collected, then the law stays on hold until the people get to vote on whether they think this is a good law or not. So basically, Prop 31 is asking you if you want SB 793 to go into effect. The fiscal implications of the law, the legislative analyst says that the fiscal effects will largely depend on how much tobacco sales might decrease as the result of 793. The estimate is that this measure could reduce state tobacco tax revenues from anywhere from $10 million to $100 million annually. And so this reduction then would affect programs that are funded by tobacco taxes, like healthcare, early childhood programs, tobacco control, and medical research. If smokers just merely switch from flavored products to unflavored products, then the revenue loss will be smaller. If they stop using tobacco entirely, the revenue loss will be greater. So the supporters of the law are mostly healthcare advocacy groups, and they say that big tobacco targets kids, that 80% of kids who smoke start by using flavored tobacco products because the flavors hide the nicotine hit. The supporters say that tobacco is the #1 preventable cause of death in California. It kills 40,000 people annually. And they say that big tobacco preys on minority neighborhoods where menthol flavored products are favored by 85% of the smokers. And at last I had checked, I don't have more recent thing. This is as of June 30th. Supporters of this bill had raised about $2.8 million, mostly come from Kaiser Health Foundation, the American Heart Association, and Michael Bloomberg also has stepped in financially. The opponents of this law are basically big tobacco. And they say it's already illegal to sell any tobacco products to anyone under 21. So this, if kids are hooked, it's already illegal for them to have cigarettes in the first place. They say that prohibition doesn't work and that this bill would provide no additional funds for law enforcement. And that they say that this law would primarily impact minority neighborhoods and it would cause increased criminal activity because there would be underground black market sales of these flavored tobacco products that are favored in those minority and low-income neighborhoods. And as of June 30th, about 15 million has been raised in opposition, mostly from R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris. So the question is, should SB 793, the law that was passed in 2020, should that law banning the sale of most flavored tobacco products in California, should that law be allowed to take effect? So a yes vote means that you want the law to take effect, and a no vote means that you don't, that the law would be removed from the books.
Okay, the only question, reinstate flavored tobacco. Is that the question? Well,
no, and the question is, well,
that's the result.
It's not necessarily reinstate, it's just to keep it because it's available already in California. But if 793 takes effect, then would not be able to sell to flavored tobacco products in California.
Okay. Well, now we're going to go from the state ballot measures to the county ballot measures. And the first ballot measure is Measure A, and Renee Lesk of the Greater LA League is going to speak to that.
I just unmuted myself. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And now you can see me. Los Angeles County Measure A is a county charter amendment. The question asked by this Measure A is, should the LA County Board of Supervisors be authorized to remove a sheriff from office for cause by a 4/5 vote after written notice and an opportunity to be heard? For cause is defined as 1, violation of a law related to the sheriff's duties. 2, flagrant or repeated neglect of sheriff's duties. 3, misappropriation of public funds or public properties. 4, willful falsification of documents. And 5, obstruction of an investigation into the sheriff's or the department's conduct. The background to this, I think everybody knows, has been quite storied. It is that the LA County Sheriff leads one of the largest law enforcement agencies in the United States. The LA County Board of Supervisors has recently expressed concern over a lack of accountability and transparency in the Sheriff's Department. In 2016, the board implemented a Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission. whose charter is to improve public transparency and accountability with respect to the department. In March of 2020, voters approved Los Angeles County Measure R, which authorized the Sheriff's Civilian Oversight Commission to develop a plan designed to reduce jail population and incarceration, and granting the commission subpoena power to investigate complaints. There has been resistance to the commission's oversight by current and previous sheriffs. The California Constitution allows a county charter to provide for the terms and removal of any elected or appointed county officer. What the charter amendment says is that Measure A would amend the charter of the County of Los Angeles to allow the Board of Supervisors to remove a sheriff from office for cause. The action would require a 4/5 vote by the board, and the sheriff would have to be given written notice and an opportunity to be heard. Fiscal impact would be negligible. Supporters of this include the LA County Supervisors Sheila Kuhl, Hilda Solis, Molly Mitchell, and Janice Hahn. Holly Mitchell writes, "The issue of sheriff accountability before us is both urgent and systemic, having impacted past generation of Angelenos, but also with important consequences for the future. Unfortunately, the county has had long and troubling history with sheriff oversight and transparency." The opponents are LA County Supervisor Catherine Barger and LA County Sheriff Alex Villanueva. Catherine Barger writes, "Giving the Board of Supervisors authority to remove an elected sheriff unequivocally takes away power from the public. It's a move that has the potential to disenfranchise voters. It also overlooks the fact that a recall process already exists to remove elected officials who fail to perform their duties." Sheriff Villanueva writes, "This motion is a recipe for public corruption, particularly when cause, in quotes, remains so broad and undefined. Allowing political appointees with an agenda to determine cause is fundamentally flawed." A yes vote on County Measure A would support allowing the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors by a 4/5 vote to remove the sheriff from office for cause, which is defined to include violation of laws related to the sheriff's duties, repeated neglect of the sheriff's duties, misusing public funds or properties, willful falsification of documents, or obstruction of an investigation into the department's conduct. A no vote on County Measure A would oppose allowing the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors by a 4/5 vote to remove the sheriff from office for cause. I think I saw a lot of questions coming up.
Okay, well, some of them relate back to previous propositions.
Oh, okay.
But for you, does this measure discuss how the sheriff will be appointed if removed by the Board of Supervisors?
There is no language on that in this.
Well, okay,
Kind of a blatant oversight if you think about it.
yes.
But I don't know. I actually didn't do research into how, like, if a sheriff quits or passes away, who takes the job. It might be as simple as going with that, but I don't know.
If I
Okay.
may,
Yes.
the only way by state constitution is for a sheriff to be elected. They would have to run an election to replace him. The undersheriff would assume those duties. And then I think they would act on that behalf. An election would have to be called immediately. He cannot be, an appointment cannot be made to replace a sheriff. He must be elected.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Then another question, what happens to this ballot if Luna wins?
Well, it's on the ballot, so it can't be, I don't think it can be removed from the ballot for such a cause. With the people will vote for it. And if they vote that the Board of Supervisors can drop a sheriff, then Luna will live in that reality. And if they don't vote for it, then Luna will, if he's elected, will become sheriff in the traditional way. And the Board of Supervisors will not be able to remove him from office.
Okay. Then it says, do you know what part of the state constitution outlines the process? I assume you're speaking of the process of replacing an elected sheriff who is taken out of office.
You know, I did not study that. I don't know.
Was that
Maybe I should know,
Francis?
but I don't know if a sheriff has ever been removed from office before this
Francis,
time.
was that you who answered the question previously?
I think it was Martha,
Oh.
I
Okay.
think.
Do you have any comment on that? Is it in the state constitution?
It is in the state constitution, and I can get you the to everybody.
Okay, thank you. What powers does the Board of Supervisors have over the sheriff's office at this time?
As of this time, their primary power is what they were given with, looking it up here. The Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission. So they do have some oversight, but my understanding is that they have pretty limited power as of now. And Alex Villanueva has basically refused to deal with them. So, you know, it kind of depends on the cooperation of the sheriff at this point.
The only control they have is over his budget, what they approve.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that's much more than a sheriff, you know, an individual sheriff question.
How come LA County measures are not described in Voter's Edge or the Secretary of State Voter Guide? Well, the Secretary of State Voter Guide does not include local measures.
It wouldn't-
I don't know about Voter's Edge policy in relation to this. Maybe Margot could answer that.
Yes, we will be posting the pros and cons that have been written for both the county ballot measures on Voter's Edge, and they will appear on everybody's ballot in LA County. It is something that will be done very soon. And we hope that when people look up their ballots, that they will read the arguments and the explanation for each of these ballot measures, Measure A and Measure C.
Well, now we're going to look at Measure C, and we'll go back to Fatima, who is going to speak on Measure C for us.
Yes, I am. All right. Okay. So, Measure C, the question, shall the measure enacting a tax in the unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County on cannabis businesses at an annual rate not exceed $10 per square foot for cultivation, adjusted for inflation, and a percentage of gross receipts for various cannabis businesses, including retail 6%, testing laboratory 2%, distribution 3%, manufacturing and all other cannabis businesses 4%, generating approximately $10,360,000 to $15,170,000 annually until ended by voters be adopted. So the situation with this, to the next slide. So in February 2022, the Office of Cannabis Management within the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs was directed by the board to start the development and implementation of an equitable commercial cannabis licensing program in the unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County. They recommended regulatory framework, including building a robust cannabis equity program. The program will provide access to resources such as initial priority licensing, business development, and technical assistance, and pro bono legal assistance, access to capital, and other potential pathways to jobs, entrepreneurship, and other ancillary economic opportunities within and outside of the cannabis industry. This program will help address administrative barriers that create inequitable outcomes and calls for investments to bridge the gaps in educational, technical, and financial resources caused by systemic racism and exacerbated by the war on drugs. The county is still developing regulations for cannabis operations in unincorporated areas, with an ordinance expected to come before the Board of Supervisors next year. In the meantime, the Board of Supervisors voted unanimously, with the exception of Janice Hahn, who was absent that day, to place a proposed tax measure on the November 8th ballot. The measure will require a simple majority of voters to be approved. Currently, cannabis businesses remain prohibited in unincorporated LA County until the permitting program is launched, and it will happen in 2023.
1B and 4C.
So here is what the measure will do. The tax would generate about 10.4 million annually beginning on July 2023. And continuing through July 2026, the county supervisors have the option to raise the tax rates later, which makes it adjustable rate, which could generate as much as 15.2 million in annual revenues. Let's see, make sure you can see this clearly. These are some of the rates that are here right now. Retail 4%, and this is of gross receipts. Manufacturing 3% of gross receipts. Distribution 3% of gross receipts. Testing 1% of gross receipts. And then another caveat that's in here that I think is interesting is that illegal cannabis businesses will also be taxed through this measure because they feel that this is would allow regulators to prosecute on tax evasion, for example, and it's just another tool for them to combat illegal businesses. Now, I will say that these are some of the lowest rates in the state. They're designed to better promote the viability of the legal cannabis business. In addition, fast-changing nature of the cannabis regulatory industry landscape and the need for county to adjust tax rates and respond to maturing, competitive, and viable legal cannabis market in Los Angeles County. So the proposed measure allows the board to decrease or increase tax rates after July 2026. So a yes vote means approval of Measure Sheet C would authorize the Los Angeles County to impose a general tax on cannabis business activities in the unincorporated areas of Los Angeles County. It is, if approved by the voters, the county code will be amended to authorize a tax on cannabis businesses engaged in activities defined in the ordinance such as cultivating, selling, processing, distributing, or testing cannabis or cannabis products in the unincorporated areas of the county. Personal cannabis cultivation or use will be exempt from this tax. The monies gathered will go into the county general fund. And then if no, they will still continue to put together a permit program and still outline regulatories. There just would not be a tax. Any questions?
Are there other plant nurseries taxed in a similar manner as proposed here?
There are, this program's already taken place in cities like Calabasas has their own, City of Los Angeles has their own. It's shown that they've brought quite a bit of income into it. It's also helped kind of regulate all the illegal dispensaries and nurseries that have come up. And it's been mentioned, even Catherine Barger is mainly up. She does a lot in the Palmdale, Lancaster area where there's a lot of concern about these illegal nurseries and growings. And she feels that this will help actually by providing a way for people to get legal marijuana or cannabis and then push out the illegal issues there. And once again, they will also be forced to be taxed even if they are illegal, and therefore it makes it a little bit easier to get them on tax evasion charges.
The next are two questions that are sort of related. One is, why is this focused on unincorporated areas? And the second one is, do all LA County residents vote on this?
Yes, all LA County residents vote on this, simple majority vote. It is something that LA County and the incorporated areas, it's not something they focused on in the past. Now that with other cities, and there's even state mandates on this, it was time for the unincorporated areas to also have some sort of regulatory and structure way to actually accomplish having businesses in those areas. They're going to even it out between all the county districts. And so we'll see how many they put in. They're still working on those, but they're trying to make it even with terms of the amount of dispensaries in a certain district or nurseries in a certain district. So they're working on it as we go.
Are other landscape plant nurseries taxed like this?
I don't know. I don't know. It depends on what they're growing. This is very much focused on things like, for example, an alcohol tax, a cannabis tax, a tobacco tax. They're looking to find a way to regulate it, but still allow it, and just find the best way to bring in money from it and make it a little bit safer to do and more equitable.
Okay. Now we have some questions to go back to. Fatima, since you're still online here, let's
Sure.
go back to Prop 1 for a minute.
Okay.
So a Prop 1 question. Okay, 958. Here we go. Could the law be, Prop 1,
Mhm.
the law be construed to apply outside of reproductive rights specifically for, in terms of the quote, in their most intimate decisions? Seems like it could mean other things.
Sure, I'm sure that what they do is they just kept it broad. When it gets sometimes in legislation gets so specific that when it's so specific, you have to regulate all of that specificity. So I'm not sure what they mean. And I think in this constitutional amendment, they meant to keep it as brief, general as possible, just to kind of be an umbrella for everything.
And the second question is, as I understand it, abortion is only legal in California until the fetus is viable. Proposition 1 doesn't contain this limitation, so I believe it is an expansion of abortion rights. Is that true?
Well, it's not mentioned in the deep brief that it takes that out, but it could be assumed that since it is a constitutional amendment with no limits, it's possible that that was overruled in a sense. So you could have abortion rights up until birth, but it's not. This is an assumption based on having such a general constitutional amendment.
And the state laws come into effect too.
Yes, the state laws come into effect as well. So it would be interesting to see how that goes into play, because it is a constitutional amendment, which is an umbrella for the state laws.
We had a couple of questions for Robbie. Relating to Prop 29, a couple of people have asked if you could give some information on how they could access that study, whether maybe, I don't know if you have a link or maybe you just have, and you can put it in the chat if you want.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it. Yeah, that actually was interesting. Carol Moon Goldberg sent it to me, sent the link, but I will see if I can find it and get it to people. So
okay, then the other question was, let's see, 1051. Why has the bill 793 not gone into effect yet?
well, because as I said, once a law is passed and someone decides they don't like that law, they have 90 days to collect signatures. And so once the signature gathering process begins, the law is put into abeyance and just sits and waits. And then again, if enough signatures are collected to put it on the ballot, then the law is still held in abeyance until the results of the vote of the people are found. So.
And then to Renee, where does the authority for the Police Oversight Commission come from? Do you have that information? Maybe Renee's not on anymore.
This is Margot. The county actually passed a ballot measure to allow the Sheriff's
you.
Oversight Commission, and then to modify it to allow the Sheriff's Oversight Commission to ask for, or to, I'm trying to think of the word, summons people to testify. So it was, both were passed by the voters.
Okay. That is the end of our speaking group. And I know that Natalia did add some information to the chat. I know that she had to leave, and we said she could have a little bit more time at the end if she's still available, but I don't know whether she is or not, because I know she had another appointment to go to. So I would say perhaps she has left, because I think her appointment was 11:30. So, but she did put something in the chat. And just to remind all of you, you can save the chat to your computer. If you go down at the bottom by where you would be typing in a message and look to the right, there are 3 little dots. And if you click on those 3 little dots, one of your choices will be save chat. And then at the end, when this meeting has closed, if you have clicked that, the information in the chat will come to your computer in a file.
Nancy?
Yes.
Oh, I have just the thing about that study
Yes.
was done in the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology, and it was in their July 2018 issue.
Well,
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, you raised your hand and I didn't see it.
That's okay. It was only raised briefly, so it's all right.
Okay, well, I'll turn this back over to Margot.
well, thank you very much, Nancy, for conducting our ballot briefing. This has been very, very informative, and I hope that those of you who participated have learned something and will feel a little bit more prepared to go out and talk to audiences in your communities. Now, the link to the action workshop has been put into the chat, and you should use that in order to get to the action workshop, which will begin at 11:30. Remember that action and voter service should never be mixed in one event. And we hope that that people who are known for making action statements for the League of Women Voters do not go out and do pros and cons, and vice versa, that people who wear that voter service hat day in and day out do not also either publish or make public statements explaining the League's position on ballot measures. We have to maintain a separation between our 501c3 and our 501c4 tax status, and we must maintain the reputation of the League for being nonpartisan and using our voter service arm to educate voters and not to try and influence their decisions. So thank you all very, very much for being here. We were very pleased to have over 80 people participating, and we hope to see many of you at 11:30 on the action workshop. Thank you again.